Good evening, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Beneath the Waves with myself, Matt Silver, and our senior practitioner from Complete, Dave Hughes. Good evening, Dave.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 3. And we're very excited today to have Dr. Alan Watkins with us. Matt will do a fuller introduction to Alan a little bit later. But before we do that, let's do what we did last week and do a quick reminder of what we covered the week before. And please use the chat just to give us your feedback on how the week's been, how you got on with any practice you've been doing of the e-diary and the e-bank and the things we spoke about last week, any challenges you've had, any help you need. But while you're doing that, let me give you a quick reminder of what we went through last week. So we started by talking about the high performance grid and just how important it is to be in a positive emotional state rather than a negative emotional state. Much more important than activation versus relaxation, because being in a positive emotional state means that you can think clearly, you can think creatively, it's good for your long-term resilience, good for your health, good for your energy levels, because your heart is giving a nice, coherent, positive signal to your brain. And how breathe really helps you move from that negative emotional state over to the left-hand side of that grid to a positive emotional state. And then we went on to share some additional tools that you can all use to help you manage your own emotions. It all starts with awareness, which is why we said try keeping an e-diary, an emotion diary, and mapping out on that performance grid where your emotions are during each day, how many in the top right, top left, bottom right, and bottom left. And building your awareness, and as you do that, building your repertoire of emotions. You could have used the Universe of Emotions, which is an app that we spoke about, that enables you to find new emotions. It clusters emotions around each other, so it's a great way of discovering and widening your repertoire. And then we spoke about the e-bank skill, which is all about how you manage your energy. So understanding what is it that boosts your energy during the week and what is it that drains your energy, and trying to manage your days and your weeks and your time so that you have more boosters in your life and that you manage the drainers effectively, so you stay in a with high energy. So that's a quick reminder of what we did last week. Let's have a look and see. Nothing on the chat so far. So I don't know whether that means you haven't been practicing or it's going brilliantly. Hopefully the latter. But if you've got any questions as we go through, please use the Q&A or the chat, and we'll come back to that during our Q&A session at the end.
Super. So, Dave, we've cut down the introduction tonight. We want to make as much time as possible to hear from Alan. Alan is still is, Alan, are you still, I should say, a physician, a neuroscientist, and also an epidemiologist, which at this time couldn't be better placed, and you couldn't get more expertise in one person for the situation that we're currently finding ourselves in. And Alan is recognised as an international expert on leadership and human performance. Over the years, he has coached thousands of individuals to greater levels of performance. And that's not just in business, that's across many different areas, as I'm sure we'll come on to this evening. And he's transformed organisational cultures and helped leaders discover new ways to succeed. I reached out to Alan a year ago when I was looking at the HRV TED Talk, one of your TED Talks that touches upon that and sits behind emotion. Episode 1 that's available on YouTube, and the podcast is available to go back to if you want to see the original work on that. But from that conversation with Alan through LinkedIn and how open-minded Complete are, I was very kind to have Dave come in and support us as a senior leadership team. And we've been working with Complete ever since. So good evening, Alan. Thank you for all of the support for Shaftesbury High School in particular. But I know that your work actually started out in education as well.
Yes, indeed, Matt. In fact, a lot of the work we do in organisations, it often sort of makes you wonder that you're teaching things to people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. and you wonder, why wasn't this taught at school? And so when we set the company up, for the first 3 years, we did some pro bono work in 12 inner city schools in Southampton, and saw some remarkable results. So I'm very passionate about, sharing these sort of skills that you chaps have been sharing with teachers and, of course, to children, because it makes a massive difference. And we've seen that in schools. So delighted to be talking to both of you this evening.
Okay.
So, Alan, we said last week, this week's going to be about how you manage your emotions and going deeper. And we started with the awareness and building the literacy with the e-diary and so on. But this week, if you could share some tools to really help people actually manage their emotions and move out of one emotional state into another emotional state, that would be fantastic.
Be delighted to do that. And just by way of preface to that, one of the things when I was a jobbing physician for about 12 years, I often used to sort of think, if you're only allowed to teach human beings one thing, what would that one thing be? And I came to the conclusion the single thing that would make the biggest difference to anybody's life was the ability to regulate their own emotion, because it changes brain function, and in that change in brain function, you get more clarity. And also poorly regulated emotions is kind of like the superhighway to many of the diseases I was seeing as a doctor, and there's overwhelming evidence for that. So I can't recommend highly enough the game-changing nature of the simple fact of getting control of your own emotional state. It's an absolute game changer for any human being and for society at large. There's two things I want to share this evening, which is two of the skills we're going to teach. But before we do, I just want to give a bit of a context about how emotion changes the quality of thinking. So just want to ask, maybe run a quick poll in a second. Imagine you've got an Ofsted report to write and you've sat down at the end of a long day and you're sort of hacking through it, and you get to a point where you just kind of get a brain jam and you think, just not quite sure how to say this. What am I going to write here? And you get, which we've all experienced, that sort of stuck, a bit of writer's block if you momentary get that. So the question is, what do you do to get unstuck? So we've given you some polling options of, do you, count to 10, phone a friend, have a cup of tea or coffee, have a glass of wine, go for a cigarette, go for a walk, exercise, or something else. So just those people that are listening in or watching, just want them to click on, well, what do you do when you get stuck? Because the first technique I'm going to share with you was sort of built out of things that people already do. And I noticed that there were lots of techniques that people had tried. I can see nobody's admitting to having a glass of wine.
Exactly what I was about to say.
Don't worry, chaps and chapesses. It's all anonymous. Nobody knows it's you that's drinking a glass of wine. Possibly you're doing it now. If you look at all the techniques that people do, and this is just 7 options for you, there are many, many more. What I noticed is that all of them work sometimes. And so, the commonest one here in this population is people, go for a walk outside, have a cup of tea. What we didn't load up there is sometimes people phone a friend. So I got very interested about when people, are stuck and want to clear their mind, clear their head effectively, what do they do? When you analyze that and, almost sort of applying medical thinking is what's the real active ingredient? What moves the dial? And in this population, people think the best technique of those offered were to go and have a cup of tea, make a cup of tea, make a cup of coffee, and that will, maybe move the dial. So when I looked at all those different techniques, whether it was phone a friend, have a cup of tea, sleep on it, go for a run, or whatever it was, I realized that there were some consistent factors. So every single one of those techniques start with the same start point. I'm just going to share the screen here, see if you can see this. So let me know, Dave. Can you see this slide here. I'll just
Yeah.
bring it in a bit bigger. So every one of those techniques involve you stopping what you're doing and shifting your attention. So you may shift your attention to the tea or the coffee. You may shift your attention to whatever your friend's saying. You may shift your attention to the way the wind rustles through the trees. You may shift your attention to a piece of music. But every single one of those techniques involve you stopping what you're doing, which is writing the report, and shifting your attention. Every single one of them. And so the next step that they all involved was the induction of a positive emotion. And what I realized, it was this thing, the induction of a positive emotion, which determined whether the technique worked or didn't. So sometimes you go for a walk, and while you're walking, you tread in chewing gum. And it annoys you, and you get an induction of a negative emotion. And when you get a negative emotion triggered, your mind doesn't clear. You can't think straight. Or if you phone a friend and the friend amps up your irritation, agrees with your sense of injustice and fuels the flames, then your mind doesn't clear. But if any of those techniques, whether it's count to 10, phone a friend, have a cup of tea or have a cup of coffee, go for a cigarette, if they inadvertently trigger a positive emotion, and you feel that in your body, so it's not enough that the emotion is triggered, you actually have to physically feel that emotion. So it's not think a happy thought, it's not think positive, because I genuinely believe that thinking positive is insufficient. You actually have to feel it in your body. And if you feel that emotion in your body, that positive emotion in your body, it will turn your brain back on. So I realized when all those techniques, and every single one of them were hit and miss, but when they all worked, they worked for those 4 reasons. You stopped what you're doing, you moved your attention to whatever it was. That thing that you moved your attention to induced a positive emotion. If you really felt it, your brain turned back on and you got the clarity. So in this first technique, all we added, it was an additional step, because sometimes you go to make a cup of coffee in the staff room, there's no coffee left. Sometimes you phone a friend, it's engaged, or they don't pick up. Sometimes you think, well, I'll go for a walk. It's raining. You can't go for a walk. So all of those things rely on something outside of yourself to be present. Your friend, the coffee, the tea, the cigarette, the weather, whatever it is. So we thought, well, why don't you just rely on yourself? And so we introduced the H, which is focus on your heart. And the reason to focus on the heart is that's where most human beings experience positive emotion. So I might love my children with all my heart. I might perceive that in my amygdala, my hippocampus, my anterior cingulate cortex, but where I feel the sensation of love is in the center of my chest. So interestingly, if I focus my attention on the center of my chest, it helps induce that positive emotion. And the good news is, of course, wherever you go, your heart goes with you, hopefully. So you don't need to rely on the friend being on the end of the line. You don't need to rely on the coffee being available, the cigarettes being available, a glass of wine being available, or anything, that favorite piece of music being accessible to you. You don't need to rely on anything other than yourself. So when you shift your attention away from the problem, focus on your heart, induce that warm, wonderful feeling, let it flow through every cell in your body and really enjoy and really feel that feeling, it turns your brain back on. So if you try that technique, after tonight's call, whenever you're stuck on a problem, put your pen down, just close your eyes for a moment, focus on the heart, do a little bit of that breathing that Katie taught us, breathe through the heart, but most importantly, try and feel a warm, wonderful feeling and really indulge that and enjoy that warm, wonderful feeling flowing through your system. You'll find your brain turns back on. And so as your brain turns back on, an idea occurs to you. And that's how it happens. So I'll often say to people, when you've had a bright idea, where do you think the idea was 30 seconds before it occurred to you? Was it in your handbag? Was it in your shoe? Was it in your backpack? And the answer is no, it was already in my mind. But then why did it just suddenly land then? I don't know. And what we believe is if you change the internal conditions with a shift skill, suddenly the ideas land. So the metaphor we often use, it's like airplanes circling Heathrow Airport. And when it's really foggy, metaphorically, and the fog is chaotic emotion, disturbed emotion, anxiety and panic around health crises or whatever it is, or inspectors in the school. When your emotions are turbulent, it's like the airport's foggy and ideas can't land. That's why you can never think of the smart thing you wish you'd said in the middle of the argument, because your emotions are in a turbulent space. But when you induce a positive emotion, it clears the fog. And suddenly the ideas are landing. And so when you get good at this, you can do it with your eyes open and people don't even know you're doing it. And so you get into a very different space where you have all the ideas available to you because they're already there. So you're able to land these ideas and get much more perceptive. And when you write down, if you actually get the discipline of, let me just try this. I'll write down my first idea when I was sort of agitated, and I'll put my pen down. I'll go through these simple steps and I'll write down what happens after I felt a positive emotion. And when you can compare the pre and the post, you often see a very dramatic shift. Ironically, when you engage the heart, it often comes out much more rational. Whereas when you're engaging the mind, it's often much more emotional, paradoxically. So I really encourage people to give that a try, shifting their emotional state. Now, the other thing I'd add here is human beings can shift their emotional state. We do it all the time. The weather comes, it gets sunny, we start to feel a bit more cheerful. Our favorite piece of music comes on, we feel more cheerful. So we're shifting emotional states all the time. All we're really suggesting here is to do it on purpose when you need to. So that's the first technique, Dave, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does, Alan. Yes. Sorry, I was just unmuting. Yeah. No, and look, and we've talked about this a lot and used it. And Matt's going to give a personal example at the end of this. But maybe quickly show the mastery skill. We're running out of time a little bit.
Okay, let me crack on. So there's two things that you need to know. Is you need to be able to change how you feel, and shift is a way of doing that. And just start practicing. You can shift. It's much easier than you realize. But even just giving it a go, can I shift from whatever I'm in, bored, to exuberant? Can I shift just to bored to patient? Can I shift at all? So just starting to try to change your emotions to trigger a positive. So put your favorite piece of music on, pump up the volume, go into a state of exhilaration. But once you've shifted, then the second technique's required is, well, if you got to the planet of exhilaration, can you stay there? And so the second technique was a mastery technique. And how that works, really.
Sorry, Alan, just to cut in there, where you're talking about getting to those emotions, are you talking about choosing certain emotions that then suit that state and the time that you're going into? So for example, Dave's talked about this in prior to meetings, or when you've had a bad meeting and you have another. Is there an emotion to pick out on? Is there something that you sort of recommend as a focus, or do you build a number of these?
Well, both of those is true, right? So ultimately, you pick out one, right? You pick the emotion for the situation that you're facing. But in the first instance, just shifting. You need to develop the ability to change. And so that is the first goal. It's kind of just change from whatever I'm in to something else. But with a bit more practice, you start to wondering what I'm changing to. So when we were teaching the Olympic athletes coming up to London 2012 and then Rio 2016, particularly the rowers, we actually had an emotional plan for the entire race. And so we taught them to turn on different emotions at different parts of the race. And it helped them win the medal. So they had such control. So ultimately, if you're a teacher going into a lesson and an Ofsted inspector is sitting in there, what emotion is most appropriate? Maybe it's upbeat, maybe it's resolute, maybe it's engaging, So ultimately, you'll select the emotion that's required for that meeting, that lesson, that classroom, that pupil, that sporting activity. But in the first instance, just shifting is what you're really practicing doing. So imagine you're now good at shifting, then you're getting to, well, once I get to a new emotion, and the way to do this is to master an individual emotion. The best way to start that is actually try and master a positive emotion when it happens spontaneously. So if you notice at any point in your week you've drifted accidentally into a positive emotion, just observe it, right? And now this is an observational technique. This isn't a visualization or an imagination. Imagine the state of contentment or try and visualize a contenting scene. No, if contentment arises in you, observe it. Just sort of close your eyes and look at it momentarily. Then open your eyes and try and write down as many features as you can of that particular emotional state. So if you notice and observe the emotion you're experiencing, try and really feel the different types of energy in your body and capture your experience on a sheet. And I'll show you the kind of sheet that we use in our work. And then you can return to it time and time again. So what we've done is provide people with sheets, and there are 3 types of features in emotions that you can notice. So what you might call the basic features. So where in the body is that emotion? And as I said before, many of the positive emotions focus on the center of the heart. Some of the negative emotions are in the guts. But where in your body are you feeling it? How big is that? Is it the size of the pea? Is it the size of an orange? Is it the watermelon? Does it fill the whole chest cavity? What color is it? Is it jet black? Is it orange? Is it red? Is it blue? And is that color consistent all over the body? Does it have a particular shape, a triangle, a square, a rectangle? Is it an amorphous shape? What level of intensity does it operate with on a 0 to 10 scale, where 1 is barely perceptible and 10 is orgasmic? How intense is this feeling? Does it have a sound? And these are questions we've never really, as human beings, asked ourselves. But actually, even when you say to people, well, what sound was that emotion? And most people say, I have no idea. And then if you offer them some alternatives, so say they were trying to master the state of excitement, and they say, well, what sound does excitement make? I've no idea. And the reason they've no idea, they've never really thought about it. I say, well, does it make this sound? Oh. And they go, well, no, that's not the sound of excitement. What about this sound? Oh. No, that's not the sound either. What about this sound? Yes. And they go, yeah, that's more like it. And so actually even though they've never thought about it, when you give them prompts, they can actually identify. And the same's true of color and all these other features. Well, what's the color of contentment? I don't really know. Well, is it jet black? Oh, no, it's not jet black. So you know what it isn't. So just start to try and hone in on, well, what is it then? And you can't get it wrong. It's a subjective experience that you're trying to objectify. You're trying to define what is that experience. So when you talk about contentment, what is it you're really feeling? What is the sound, the shape, the size, the temperature, the color of contentment? And then there's movement features. How does that contentment move through the body? Does it go up the body? Does it go down the body? Does it go to the fingertips? Does it go to the tip of the head? Does it go to the tip of the toes? And in what way does it move? Does it move slowly? Does it move as a whoosh? Is it swirling? Is it firing off in all directions? And so that's within the body. And how does it move off the body? So does it radiate? Does it stop at the skin? Does it radiate 1 inch, a foot, 2 foot? Does it fill the whole room? Does it fill the room front and back? So all you're really doing is you're trying to convert something that's normally a subjective internal experience, and you're objectifying it. This is called a subject to object maneuver. So you're objectifying it. You're turning something that is normally hidden to you and subjective, and you're objectifying, and you're trying to write down the descriptions. And then there are special features. It puts a spring in my step. It brings a smile to my face. It's the tear of joy. There are special features. So if you just sort of sketch out, and again, you cannot get this wrong. It's your experience of contentment, nobody else's, yours. So just start to sketch it out. And then what we encourage you to do is to return to that sketch time and time. And the sketch becomes a very rich, textured, a bit like an oil painting. And the more features you put on it, the easier it is to get a grip of that particular emotion. And therefore you can hold on to it and sustain it for much longer. And then once you've objectified it and you've got a detailed description, you can reinstall it into your own system and re-experience the contentment. And so if you learn to shift to a different emotion and you learn to master a specific emotion, you'll find that you've got 2 of the most critical skills that you're going to need as a human being. And soon we're going to be releasing this app. Here's a piece of research, if those of you can see rather than just listen to the podcast. There was a bit of research which was done all over the world as people colored emotions. So we're going to be releasing an app relatively soon to help everybody do all the things that we've been talking about on these Beneath the Waves podcasts, where you'll be able to do this on your phone, the shape, the size, the color, the sound, the intensity, and so on, and construct your own suite of emotional states, which you're familiar with, and share them with your friends, see how they experience them, and so on. So as you master any one emotion, you'll find over time that when you're feeling off kilter, if you've mastered the state of buoyant, that's a really good antidote to feeling out of balance. You know, if you're feeling frustrated, one of the best antidotes is patience. So love isn't the antidote to every single negative emotion, despite what the poets might say. What you discover over time is there are certain positive emotions that are really excellent antidotes to other negative emotions. So you start to build up a repertoire of positive emotions that you can shift to and then turn on, hold, and master.
And we don't have to stick with the colours that you've found there.
No. I mean, this is just,
and that doesn't.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not up there, but
it's unique to you.
I wonder. I mean, we're sort of the half hour that we have for this is sort of coming to an end. We are going to, just as we did last week, keep this open and open it up to voice to all of you, for those of you who want to stay on. But I think, Matt, I mean, you've got some really personal experience of using these skills, and it'd be quite nice to bring it to life and give a real example of that. Perhaps you could do that really quickly, and then we'll sort of end the formal bit and move into the forum, and anyone who wants to stay and explore this further, we can do that together.
Yeah, I think there's some real depth there, and you can talk to Alan all evening and find out more and more as you go, as myself and Dave have certainly experienced. But the opportunity that I had when Dave came in to run this with our team was very much around, okay, where did I find my passion for leadership, and where did I find my first sense of fulfillment? So for me, stepping back and experiencing that has always been on my residential trips down to the south of France, where I first really took a leadership role outside of captain of the football team. And it was always on the Friday, I stepped back from the group and watched the group function as its own unit. And I approached my leadership in a very organic way, in that sense of really trying to generate my team to build itself and to cohesively come together. So stepping back into that state when I'm challenged around my style of leadership, or am I perhaps being too organic, actually I can step back into really seeing the green of the grass that surrounds the group and feeling the texture of that grass almost within my heart, and the shape of that being a very circular effect. And I think that comes from how the group came together and therefore was very whole. The feeling to me has always been sort of a light murmur of movement, and that just gives me a really happy sense of fulfillment. And that's the emotion that I go back to, is fulfillment and not trying to control others. So that sense of fulfillment allows me to really step back and just go, hang on a minute, this is learning for everyone. This is the opportunity to learn. So I would go into a bit more depth, but I'm conscious of the time on that, Dave. But I just want to say thank you very much to Alan for coming on this week. Obviously, we're pulling together the work of the first 2 episodes into the third, and most certainly we should try and get Alan back onto the show as we come to the 6th week. And we've got a few more guests lined up as well in the coming weeks. So thank you very much to you, Alan. As Dave said, we'll be hosting questions, but from the show side of things and what's available on YouTube and on the podcast, thank you very much for joining us this week. And we look forward to seeing you next week on Beneath the Waves.
Thanks, chaps.